Born in 262 AC, Robert was the firstborn child of Cassana Estermont and Stefan Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and head of House Baratheon. He was a scant year older than his brother Stannis, who was born in 264 AC. When Robert was already in his teens, his youngest brother Renly was born. According to Stannis, when Robert was 5 or 6 years old, the two brothers were brought to court by their father Stefan, where they witnessed the hand of the king, Lord Tywin Lannister, sitting on the Iron Throne and holding court. Young Robert also played with an Estermont cousin whose father was good to the future king. Robert had a gerfalcon named Thunderclap who never missed her strike, and he mocked Stannis' goshawk Proudwing as Weakwing. From an early age, Robert had been fostered by Lord Jon Arryn at the Eyrie in the Vale of Arryn, together with Eddard Stark of Winterfell. The two boys became fast friends, and Jon, who had no children of his own, became like a second father to them. During the period in which he was fostered, Robert visited Storm's End on multiple occasions. At some point, Robert was knighted. During a tourney at Storm's End, Robert was defeated by Sir Barristan Selmy. After reaching manhood, Robert divided his time between Storm's End and the Eyrie. In 278 AC, Robert's father was sent on a mission by King Aerys II Targaryen to travel to Volantis to find a bride for Robert's cousin, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. The mission failed, and Stefan, accompanied by his wife, returned home. Robert and Stannis watched their parents' ship, Windproud, sink in a storm in Shipbreaker Bay while nearing Storm's End. With his father's death, Robert became the Lord of Storm's End. Robert fell in love with Lyanna Stark, Eddard's younger sister. In time, Lyanna's father, Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell, agreed to betroth her to Robert. At the time of their betrothal, Robert already had a bastard daughter, Mia Stone, in the Vale of Arryn, which led Lyanna to comment that Robert would never keep to one bed despite his love for her. Eddard would later state that Robert saw only Lyanna's beauty and never recognized her boldness and strength of will. Robert most likely liked the idea of Lyanna rather than Lyanna herself. In 281 AC, Robert was present at the tourney at Harrenhal, where he took part in the melee. He held a drinking contest with Sir Richard Lonmouth and swore to unmask the mystery knight known as the Knight of the Laughing Tree, although he failed to do so. It was Robert's cousin, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, who won the final joust of the tourney. The prince crowned Lyanna, by then long betrothed to Robert, the Queen of Love and Beauty, instead of his wife, Princess Elia Martell. There are some who say that Robert laughed, stating that Rhaegar had only paid Lyanna her due, though according to men who knew Robert better, he felt it had been an insult on which he brooded long, causing him to harden against Rhaegar. The next year, Prince Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna, which set in motion a chain of events leading to Robert's rebellion. News of Lyanna Stark's kidnapping led her eldest brother Brandon, and later her father, Lord Rickard, to King's Landing demanding justice. Both were executed by order of King Aerys II, who then demanded the heads of Robert and Eddard Stark, wards of Lord Jon Arryn at the Eyrie. Jon refused, however, and rose up in rebellion instead, with Eddard, now Lord of Winterfell, following the deaths of his father and older brother, and Robert rallying the North and the Stormlands respectively. Not all of Arryn's bannermen supported the rebellion, however. Robert fought at Gulltown, where Mark Grafton and other loyalists from the Vale blocked the port. Robert slew Mark and sailed back home to Storm's End to call his banners. However, some of his own remained loyal to the throne. When Robert learned that Lords Grandison, Cafferin, and Fell planned to gather their hosts at Summerhall in order to march on Storm's End, he rode ahead with his knights. He fought each of the lords in turn, defeating all three. Robert returned to Storm's End with his captives, and there won the loyalty of Lords Cafferin and Grandison, as well as Silverax Fell, the son of Lord Fell whom Robert had slain. Free to march north so he could join forces with Jon Arryn and the Northmen, Robert marched out again, leaving his younger brother Stannis in charge of Storm's End. Stannis was torn between loyalty to his brother and loyalty to the king, ultimately siding with his family. Lord Randall Tarley fell upon Robert with his vanguard and defeated Robert's forces at the Battle of of Ashford before Lord Mace Tyrell could arrive with the main force from the Reach. Robert escaped capture with the bulk of his forces, however, and continued his journey north. Aerys wanted someone young and vigorous to match Robert and replaced Lord Owen Merryweather with Lord John Connington as his Hand of the King. Connington personally led a mighty army into the field, giving chase to Robert, whose march became grueling. Wounded and separated from his men, Robert took refuge at the Stony Sept. When Connington and his army arrived at the town and began searching the houses, the residents actively aided Robert, keeping him hidden from the king's men. In the end, they hid him in a brothel. When Lords Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully arrived with the rebel army, Robert came out of hiding and fought Connington, almost killing him. One of Robert's bastard children, Bella, fathered upon a whore in the whorehouse, was named after the Battle of the Bells. King Aerys began to realize that Robert was the greatest threat to the Targaryen dynasty since Daemon I Blackfyre and exiled Connington, naming Lord Carleton Chelstead as his hand in Connington's stead. To secure the aid of House Tully, Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark married Lord Hoster's daughters, Lysa and Catelyn. Robert attended the wedding at Riverrun. Robert led the rebel forces during the Battle of the Trident, the decisive battle near the war's end. Around this time, Robert proclaimed his intention to claim the Iron Throne. Out of all three leaders of the rebellion, Robert had the better claim due to the fact that his grandmother had been Princess Rhaella Targaryen, the youngest daughter of King Aegon V Targaryen. To justify Robert's claims, the Maesters would later use his blood ties to House Targaryen, though it was conquest that won him the throne. In 283 AC, the rebel and loyalist forces fought at a place that became known as the Ruby Ford, located on the northern bank of the Trident. Robert and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen met on horseback in single combat, with the battle raging on all around them. Rhaegar wounded Robert before Robert killed Rhaegar with a blow to the chest from his warhammer. Eventually, the Targaryen host broke and ran. When Lord Roose Bolton advised Robert to execute Sir Barristan Selmy, a captured knight of Aerys' Kingsguard, Robert refused and instead had his own maester treat the wounds of Barristan the Bold. Himself wounded and unable to chase the Loyalists, Robert entrusted the pursuit of the remnants of the Targaryen army to Lord Stark. Leading the vanguard, Eddard followed the Loyalists back to King's Landing. However, Lord Tywin Lannister had arrived earlier with an army which began attacking the city after Grand Maester Pycelle convinced Aerys to admit them within the gates. Aerys was slain in the sack of King's Landing by Sir Jaime Lannister, Tywin's son and a member of the Kingsguard. After Robert arrived in King's Landing, Tywin presented him with the mutilated bodies of Princess Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, and their two young children, Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon. While Robert was pleased they were dead, Eddard was outraged and disgusted by the act, calling it murder and saying the young prince and princess were no more than babes. Robert's response was, "I see no babes, only dragon spawn." The argument led to Eddard leaving King's Landing the next day to fight the final battles alone. It took the death of Lyanna and their shared grief to reunite the pair in friendship. Robert was thereafter haunted by Lyanna's memory and the desire for further vengeance against the slain Rhaegar. In late 283 AC, Robert was crowned king. He chose his second father, Lord Jon Arryn, as his Hand of the King. Pardoning many of his former enemies, Robert appointed Sir Barristan Selmy as the Lord Commander of his Kingsguard. Despite Eddard Stark urging Robert to strip Sir Jaime Lannister of his white cloak, Robert listened to Jon's advice and pardoned Jaime together with the Master of Whisperers, Lord Varys, and the Grand Maester Pycelle, and Jaime continued to serve in the Kingsguard along with Barristan. At his coronation feast, Robert joked to Jaime about the fact that Jaime was already being called Kingslayer. Robert allowed Sir Ronald Cunnington to keep Griffin's Roost, although Robert kept the gold, and most of House Connington's lands were granted to neighbors. Robert replaced the skulls of the Targaryen dragons in the Red Keep's throne room with banners and tapestries depicting hunting and battle. Robert tasked his brother Stannis with building a new royal fleet and capturing Dragonstone, the last Targaryen loyalist stronghold, where the pregnant Dowager Queen Rhaella Targaryen and her son Viserys remained. Stannis led the assault on Dragonstone some 9 months after the Trident, but Viserys and the newly born Daenerys Targaryen had been smuggled from the island shortly before by Sir Willem Darry. Robert blamed Stannis for letting the Targaryen children escape, even though the 2 children had been spirited to safety by Targaryen loyalists shortly before Stannis had set sail. As he now resided in King's Landing, Robert granted the ancestral Baratheon seat of Storm's End to his youngest brother, Renly, while naming Stannis as Lord of Dragonstone. Both Stannis and Queen Cersei Lannister believe that Robert intended this as a slight against Stannis, but according to George R.R. Martin, Robert had not necessarily meant it as such. Dragonstone had traditionally been the seat of the heir to the Iron Throne, the Prince of Dragonstone, during most of the Targaryen dynasty, so the then childless Robert was granting it to his heir at the time, Stannis. Stannis became the head of House Baratheon of Dragonstone, with Robert leading House Baratheon of King's Landing. Although peace returned to the Seven Kingdoms, many of those who did not support Robert referred to him as the usurper. Dorne never forgot or forgave that Robert condoned the murders of Princess Elia Martell and her 2 young children, Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon. The year after Robert took the throne, Elia's younger brother, Prince Oberyn, began plotting a rebellion in the name of the exiled Viserys. Lord Jon Arryn, Robert's new Hand of the King, traveled to Dorne, sat down with Doran Martell, the Prince of Dorne, and ended all talk of rebellion. Regardless, Robert never visited Dorne. Though Robert had no wish to marry after Lyanna Stark's death, the realm needed an heir, and Lord Jon Arryn suggested that Robert marry Lady Cersei Lannister, the only daughter of Lord Tywin Lannister, to ensure political stability and Tywin's support should Viserys Targaryen ever attempt to win back his throne. Robert and Cersei were married in 284 AC in the Great Sept of Baelor, with Robert draping her with a heavy golden cloak decorated with an onyx stag. A tourney was held to celebrate the royal wedding, and Geryon Lannister gave the king a gilded dagger with an ivory grip and a sapphire pommel. Robin named Sir Ilyn Payne as King's Justice as a gift for Tywin. On their wedding night, however, a drunken Robert accidentally whispered Lyanna into Cersei's ear while consummating the marriage, an act that would set the tone for their marriage. That was the only night when sex between Robert and Cersei was consensual. While Robert claimed his rights frequently during the early years of their marriage, his drinking led to him hurting Cersei during those encounters. When she confronted him once during their first year of marriage, Robert claimed it was because of the drink and he was not to blame. According to Robert, he did not remember anything of those nights, but according to Cersei, Robert did recall what he did to her, but felt that pretending to have forgotten was easier than facing the truth. Over time, Robert came to Cersei's bed less frequently, not even once a year. Cersei began to loathe her husband, and her cold attitude towards him created a distance between them. Robert remained in love with Lyanna for years after her death, placing further strain upon the marriage. Cersei has had an incestuous relationship with her twin brother, Jaime Lannister, for years, and they continued their illicit relationship after Cersei's marriage to Robert. Although Robert often urged Cersei to join his hunts in the early years of their marriage, Cersei refused so she could discreetly be with her brother. 2 of Robert's Estermont uncles had spent half a year at court following the wedding, and Robert insisted on repaying the visit. They remained on Greenstone for a fortnight. There, Robert slept with a widowed cousin, and upon learning this, Cersei had sex with Jaime whilst in the castle. Cersei gave birth to 3 children: Prince Joffrey, born in 286 AC, Princess Marcella, born in 289, and Prince Tommen, born in 290. Though everyone, including Robert, believed them to be Robert's children, Jaime is the biological father of all 3. Robert did not attend any of the births. Whenever Cersei's time was due, he left for a hunt, returning only after the birth. Cersei became pregnant by Robert only once. Refusing to give birth to Robert's child, she had Jaime find a woman to cleanse her. 6 years after taking the crown, Robert joined forces with his Warden of the North, Lord Eddard Stark, and his Warden of the West, Lord Tywin Lannister, to crush the Greyjoys' rebellion, which lasted less than a year. Robert and Ned fought side by side during the Siege of Pike, after which the king knighted Jacelyn Bywater and Lord Jorah Mormont. Balon Greyjoy, self-proclaimed King of the Iron Islands, submitted to Robert, who allowed the Iron Man to remain Lord of the Iron Islands, although Eddard took Balon's heir Theon as hostage. To celebrate his victory, Robert ordained that a tourney should be held outside Lannisport. Robert did not like his kingship. According to Donal Noy, Robert changed by becoming king, and not for the better. He finds business concerning coin, crop, or justice tedious. Robert barely attends small council sessions, preferring to hunt and hawk instead, and when he does attend, he usually dozes through them. He leaves the task of ruling to his small council, mostly to Lord Jon Arryn, his Hand of the King, and to Lord Stannis Baratheon, his younger brother and master of ships. Robert loathes counting coppers, but loves to organize tournaments and feasts, and so has beggared the realm. Despite the fact that King Aerys II Targaryen had left treasure vaults overflowing with gold, Robert's spending has left the crown in debt of over 6 million golden dragons, borrowed heavily from the Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Faith, and the Iron Bank of Bravos. Silver stags have been minted with Robert's face on one side and the stag on the reverse. Though Robert loves him, he does not have a close bond with his heir, Prince Joffrey Baratheon. Robert disliked that Joffrey always cried when he picked him up as a babe, as his bastard children gurgled at him happily, nor was he fond of Joffrey's nature. For instance, when Joffrey cut open a pregnant cat to see if there were kittens inside its belly and then shown his father what he'd done, Robert hit the boy, knocking out 2 of his teeth. Robert claims he has dreamed of giving up his crown, but that the thought of Joffrey on the throne with Cersei whispering in his ear has stopped him. Due to his frequent whoring, Robert has sired several bastards during his marriage to Cersei, though he has kept them out of sight. According to a prophecy by Maggie the Frog, Robert has fathered 16 children. However, Robert has openly acknowledged only 1 bastard, and Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers, knows of the existence of 8. The eldest, Maya Stone, was born to Robert while he was still in the Vale of Arryn. Robert once suggested bringing Maya to court after Prince Joffrey assaulted the cat. When Cersei threatened the girl's life, Robert hid his wife, but he refrained from bringing Maya to court. Bella was conceived during Robert's rebellion, and Gendry shortly after the rebellion had ended, to a worker in an alehouse in King's Landing. According to Lord Peter Baelish, Robert also fathered twins on a serving woman at Casterly Rock, but the 2 were killed on the orders of Queen Cersei. During the wedding of his younger brother Stannis to Lady Selyse of House Florent, Robert deflowered Delena, a cousin of Selyse, on the wedding bed. According to Robert, he was too drunk to know which bed it was. This coupling led to the birth of Edric Storm, the only openly acknowledged bastard of the king. Robert enjoys visiting Edric at Storm's End, although gifts for the boy are chosen by Varys. The youngest of Robert's base-born children is Bara, a babe born to a prostitute in King's Landing. Richard Horpe hoped to join Robert's Kingsguard, but Cersei convinced her husband to refuse Richard. Lord Stark names his firstborn son Robb, and Lord Arryn names his sole surviving child Robert. Jon Arryn's favorite falcon is a gift from the king. Robert became good friends with Thoros of Myr, laughing at the Red Priest's flaming sword, and he keeps Jalabar Zo at court as a curiosity. During the tourney on Prince Joffrey's name day, Robert won a Valyrian steel dagger from Lord Peter Baelish by betting against Jaime, who was defeated by Sir Loras Tyrell in the lists. The largest warship in the royal fleet is King Robert's hammer, that Robert named Lady Lyanna after his lost love. And now this is when we properly meet Robert. Up until that, we only heard stories from other people, which sometimes differ compared to what a character actually looks like, which is demonstrated by Jon's POV very effectively. When his Hand of the King, Lord Jon Arryn, dies suddenly, Robert decides to offer the position to his old childhood friend Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. The king was a great disappointment to Jon. His father had talked of him often, the peerless Robert Baratheon, demon of the Trident, the fiercest warrior of the realm, a giant among princes. Jon saw only a fat man, red-faced under his beard, sweating through his silks. He walked like a man half in his cups. The demon of the Trident, who was feared and respected by everyone, was long gone. Robert was never the same after he put on that crown. Some men are like swords, made for fighting. Hang them up and they go to rust. So what happened? Well, there are several reasons. He was thrust into a life he didn't want. Sure, he was the king, but he never wanted it. After Aeron rose in rebellion along with Robert and Ned, Robert had to lay claim to the throne. He was the logical choice, for he was the charismatic leader who inspired loyalty through his personality and deeds on the battlefield, but also through his blood connection to the Targaryens. Since his grandmother was Rhaella Targaryen, Robert was accepted as king as he was technically the heir at the time. They started the rebellion, but it came with a responsibility. They had to look after the realm. After Robert became king, he was smart enough to instate Aeron as Hand, an able and experienced man to run the realm. He also put Stannis and Barristan on the council, who were genuinely good people who would not go astray from their duties. Robert was a traumatized man. He went through a year-long war where he was on the front lines. He could have been killed or captured and tortured horribly at the command of King Aerys. His friends' lives were in danger, as was his foster father's. The leaders of the rebellion were fighting for more than just a rebellion. They were fighting for their lives. Defeat was not an option to them. The traumas of war must have had a profoundly negative effect on Robert. He was fueled by a sense of revenge against Rhaegar. His hatred for Rhaegar was not just because of Lyanna, but also because his parents died because of him. Aerys sent Steffon Baratheon to Essos to find a wife of the old blood of Valyria for Rhaegar. He was not successful. Upon his return, his ship was caught in a storm and broke apart in Shipbreaker's Bay, within sight of Storm's End. Robert and Stannis watched as their parents died horribly. This changed the two boys. Each learned to cope with their effects differently. Stannis became disenchanted with the world and the gods, turning bitter and atheistic. In an overwhelmingly religious society, Stannis lost faith in the gods for being cruel and taking his parents away before his eyes. Robert went in the opposite direction. He didn't show obvious signs of grief. However, as he grew older, he sought happiness in alcohol and the nurturing arms of women. He slept around and drank. Robert didn't have a genuine family. He was a fit and able fighter and elite in terms of leadership, fighting, and charisma, but he had no real companions. Stannis was depressed and disenchanted, and they didn't get along. Robert was initially raised by Maester Cresson and then by Jon Arryn. He found solace in Ned, women, and wine. Even though he was highly charismatic and popular among the people, his only real friend was Ned, which tells us a lot about his character. Robert's parents died for Rhaegar and the quest to find him a wife. Rhaegar married, but then he went ahead and took Robert's betrothed as well. Robert didn't know Lyanna very well, but he knew Ned better than most. He saw Ned in Lyanna and felt that she would be a wife with similar qualities to him. Then he would have the best wife possible. Rhaegar took her, and he had no right to do that. It was an elopement. Aerys murdered Robert's best friend's father and brother and demanded Robert and Ned's heads. Of course, Robert would rise in rebellion and destroy any Targaryen in his path. Many justify popular characters' deeds with the possible effects of their past experiences and traumas. Robert had his own traumas since childhood. Being rich and a lord does not mean that watching your parents die in front of you will have no effects on you. However, those traumas were very visible in his treatment of Targaryen children. Throughout the series, we see 3 instances where Robert interacts with young Targaryens. First are Aegon and Rhaenys, children of Rhaegar. Second is Jon, and third are Viserys and Daenerys. As I mentioned earlier, the first real conflict that Ned and Robert had was about Rhaegar's children, who were murdered by the Mountain on Tywin's orders. Ned was visibly upset by Robert's choice not to punish Tywin. In the second Ned chapter of A Game of Thrones, it is written, "Ned did not feign surprise. Robert's hatred of the Targaryens was a madness to him. He remembered the angry words they had exchanged when Tywin Lannister had presented Robert with the corpses of Rhaegar's wife and children as a token of fealty. Ned had named that murder. Robert called it war. When he had protested that the young prince and princess were no more than babes, his new-made king had replied, 'I see no babes, only dragon spawn.' Not even Jon Arryn had been able to calm that storm. Eddard Stark had ridden out that very day in a cold rage to fight the last battles of the war alone in the south. It had taken another death to reconcile them, Lyanna's death, and the grief they had shared over her passing. Years later, Ned and Robert had a similar argument about Daenerys and her child, when Robert wanted to send an assassin to finish mother and child, and Ned was against that. Based on Rhaegar and Daenerys' instances, it is no surprise that Ned did not tell him the truth about Jon Snow and Lyanna Stark. He hated Targaryens, and what's more, he hated how Rhaegar had taken what was his. Robert was not used to not getting his way. I don't think it entirely changed his viewpoint regarding the reasons behind why Lyanna went with Rhaegar. His ego was wounded in a way that could never be healed, and he would never be at peace with it. Ned loved Robert as a friend and was prepared to love him as a king, but he also knew he wouldn't under any circumstances let Jon die even if Robert ordered it. That, in turn, would risk another war, as unthinkable as it was. Ned didn't want that. Under the circumstances, Ned did the right thing. That he got away with it is often cited by some readers as a bit unbelievable, but from Robert's perspective, it was an easy story to sell. Robert had his first bastards in his youth. The idea of Ned fathering his own during the war and while away from home would just be a normal thing that men did during war. And of course, the honorable Ned Stark would want to bring his bastard home to raise. Robert probably rolled his eyes and had a good laugh about it. The whole reason Ned promised his sister on her deathbed that he would conceal Jon Snow's identity and raise him as his own is that Lyanna was absolutely convinced that if Robert knew the truth, he would have her son killed. By the way, one thing that people seem to overlook is that there is an aspect of political necessity that goes beyond Robert's anger towards Rhaegar and House Targaryen. Robert has just been acclaimed king of Westeros. As a matter of political necessity, he can't really allow heirs from the previous dynasty to threaten his reign, no matter how he feels about them. At a certain point, it doesn't really matter whether Robert is proud, wrathful, or whether Lyanna went willingly or not. The important point is that Jon Snow is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and that alone makes him a political threat to Robert's dynasty. On the other hand, we saw a different side of Robert while he was on his deathbed when he told Ned to stop the assassins against Daenerys and the child. This scene shows us how conflicted his character truly was, most likely because of his past traumas. Robert became king and pushed on as best he could. He married a woman who hated him. One of Robert's biggest weaknesses was his relationship experiences. Cersei is his wife and his queen, but instead of turning her into an ally, he only alienates her with his violent and abusive behavior. At the same time, he does almost everything she tells him. During the accident at Darry, he doesn't want to contradict her, feeling stressed by her active pushing of her own agenda, and not even trying to get to the truth and judge wisely. His only wish is to pacify her, not to get to the core of the case. This shows that, in terms of personality, Cersei is stronger and has stronger will, while physically, Robert can, of course, easily overpower her. His physical abuse towards her and his rough sexual behavior are the only ways he can compensate for the weakness of his own character, and he uses it to its full. For the realm he endured, he suffered the Lannisters and lickspittles all around. He instated Aeryn and Stannis to run the realms in his stead. He went to Ned all the way to Winterfell. It was the sign of a plea. He was indirectly begging Ned to come and help him restore the kingdom and make Joffrey a better man. It didn't work out. But Robert did try. He got fat because he wasn't made to sit on a chair and listen to complaints. He was made to fight and lead on a battlefield. He couldn't wage war for no reason, and he did not. So he got fat. Tourney melees didn't suffice any longer, for no one would properly challenge a king.